So we see with this original concept of sustainable development, the idea here is that what we need to do is to figure out, develop technology, change social organizations so that we're capable of meeting the essential needs of humanity, as well as the needs of our present generation and the generations of the future. Now, the second stopping point on this road into the future is the Agenda 21 Agreement, the Rio Agreement from 1992. And notice I'm quoting the opening paragraph of the Agenda 22 Agreement. Notice the different way that they conceptualize the place we are in history and the different way that they conceptualize the solution to the difficulties or challenges that it poses. So humanity stands at a defining moment in history. We are confronted with a perpetuation of disparities between and within nations, a worsening of poverty, hunger, ill health, and illiteracy, and the continuing deterioration of ecosystems on which we depend for our well-being. However, integration of environment and development concerns and greater attention to them will lead to the fulfillment of basic needs, improved living standards for all, better protected and managed ecosystems, and a safer, more prosperous future. No nation can achieve this on its own, but together we can in a global partnership for sustainable development. So, two elements. Suddenly, we are in a defining moment in history. Suddenly, we don't just mention that there's some poverty. Suddenly, we're confronted with the perpetuation of disparities, with the continuing deterioration of ecosystems. So there's a sense of, just 5 years later, of things being serious and at a tipping point even. But the solution here, as Redcliffe kind of suggests, it has this flavor of neoliberal market forces. We'll continue to see improvements in the standard of living. We'll have a more prosperous future when we just engage in cooperative global partnerships where we integrate concerns about the environment with our development concerns. So when Redcliffe talks about the neoliberal strains of the late 80s and early 90s, this is the sort of stuff that he's talking about. This sort of idea that these international corporations will not only be the engine of continued prosperity, that the market will continue to grow, that it will bring prosperity, it will, with just a little nudging maybe, help to get rid of these disparities between and within nations, and it will allow us to have managed and good ecosystems while still creating improved living standards for everyone and a more prosperous future. The next stop on our road to I almost forgot. So that's part of the Agenda 21 discussion. That's the opening preamble paragraph, basically. But there's another side to the Agenda 21 agreement, and that is that it introduces a lot more structure and a lot more of a characterization of what they're trying to accomplish and how they're trying to do it. So there is a lot of discussion of cooperative market forces in an ever brighter future, but there's also an effort to really try to come up with specific policies and means for implementing those policies. And this sort of stuff looks a little not neoliberal. So, for instance, Agenda 21 is broken into 4 major sections. Each section addresses a specific aspect of the approach. And the first section is social and economic dimensions. And among the things that it discusses are ways in which they're going to try and attack world poverty, and things like that. Section 2 talks about conservation and management of resources. So again, there's this sort of conception that all we have to do is just conserve, manage, properly take care of the world, and we'll no longer have this degradation of ecosystems that's mentioned in that opening paragraph. Section 3, there's a little social justice being introduced here, strengthening the role of major groups. So they talk about, for instance, the role of women, disenfranchised countries, things of that nature. And then in Section 4, there's a discussion of means of implementation. They talk about regulatory and institutional mechanisms, financing mechanisms, and things of that nature. So with Agenda 22, you see a movement that goes from talking about how it is that we can sort of change social organization and improve technology to continue meeting our needs to a much more sort of managed approach. Well, at the same time, there's a lot of that language of cooperative, dynamic, capitalist free market. Now, just a year later, we see the publication by Daly and Townsend of this paper of theirs that's infamously included, or at least one phrase is infamously included in the title of Redcliffe's paper. So I'm going to read you the very first paragraph from their paper, and then I'll give you the second paragraph, which presents a synopsis of the argument. So, first paragraph, the very start of the paper reads as follows. Impossibility statements are the very foundation of science. It is impossible to travel faster than the speed of light, create or destroy matter or energy, build a perpetual motion machine, etc. By respecting impossibility theorems, we avoid wasting resources on projects that are bound to fail. Therefore, economists should be very interested in impossibility theorems, especially the one to be demonstrated here, namely that it is impossible for the world economy to grow its way out of poverty and environmental degradation. In other words, sustainable growth is impossible. So the phrase that sort of gets carried forward from this paper, that sustainable growth is an oxymoron, it doesn't really deliver the full force of their thesis here. Their thesis is that sustainable growth is an impossibility, that it will inevitably stop. And in the next paragraph, they give us the sort of sketch of a proof for why they think that is. And it's a pretty straightforward proof. It says, look, in its physical dimensions, the economy is an open subsystem of the Earth's ecosystem. So the economy is a little part of the Earth's ecosystem. The Earth's ecosystem is finite, non-growing, and materially closed. Right? It has a finite dimensionality to it. It's never going to get any greater than that. And within it, the amount of material is finite. And there isn't more to be added. As the economic subsystem grows, it incorporates an ever greater proportion of the total ecosystem into itself. So as the economies of the world grow, they consume more and more of the Earth's ecosystem, and more land gets used, more and more oceans get fished, more and more raw materials get employed, and so on. And this must reach a limit at 100% if not before. So there's only so much the economy can grow because it's contained within the Earth's ecosystem. It can't get any bigger than the Earth's ecosystem. That's it. Therefore, growth is not sustainable. The term sustainable growth, when applied to the economy, is a bad oxymoron. Self-contradictory as prose and unevocative as poetry. So their argument essentially is, look, we've got to come to grips with the finite nature of the Earth's ecosystem. We're never going to be able to perpetually continue to improve the quality of life of people. We're never going to be able to perpetually increase the amount of economic output, because the more that we do this, the more of the Earth's ecosystem that our economy consumes. And hence, eventually, we will reach a tipping point where we've consumed the entire ecosystem, or where we've consumed so much of the ecosystem that it begins to fall apart. And so this is their essential argument. Now, as Redcliffe notes, this argument, this expression, is part of a sort of growing dissatisfaction with the sort of neoliberal conception of the unfettered, invisible hand of the market will inevitably solve the problems that arise and will continue to generate wealth that is trickling down to everyone, thereby, thereby solving the problems that we face, like degraded ecosystems, as well as inequalities, raising the lifestyle of everyone perpetually.